It was just a few months ago that a friend in Texas forwarded a cassette tape to my attention with a brief note saying, "Brother Wheeling, I think you should listen to this talk show program." Alan Dale of KRNN in San Antonio, Texas, interviewed George Hunt October of 1987. There were two interviews about a week apart. Some very interesting things began to occur. In the 1 week interval between the two interviews with George Hunt, he received a threatening phone call saying that if you bring George Hunt on the air again, you'll live to regret it. Words to that effect. Is that correct? 2 weeks after the second interview, the station was bought out, and Alan Dale lost his job and went elsewhere for employment.
Fourth World Wilderness Congress is coming to Denver. So I learned that it was very expensive to go to this particular Congress, and I did not happen to have that kind of money to just throw around. So I made some phone calls to find out if I could help. I was uniquely suited to understand the conspiracy, and I will use the word conspiracy. That is, people whispering together in a covert connection to do some dirty work against the United States. When I heard the undertones and the nuances and the double entendres that were going on in the speeches at this Congress, I knew that there was a conspiracy where others might have just had the words passed over their head. Something here that was not true, because conservation is an antipathy with growth and development. They are mutually exclusive, as we have learned. Then when I saw the world bankers at the Congress, and the UN Undersecretary Generals and the Secretary General, who I had dinner with one night, and the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Secretaries of the Treasury and so on, I said to myself, why are they suddenly interested in conservation? The world bankers are the ones that have destroyed the rainforest down in Brazil. If you look at the history of the World Bank under Robert S. McNamara, he's the one that designed the Vietnam War. He left the Vietnam War in 1967 and went over to World Bankdom, where he became the president. He set up massive loans that were given without the permission of the American people. There was a token rubber stamp for these massive loans to go out of our world banking system into the hands of Brazil and Mexico and the Latin America countries. And we don't know really how those monies were spent. Billions were spent on dams that don't work. Rainforests were slashed down and ruined, and our oxygen-generating areas of the world were decimated by the very people that were saying that they wanted to save our ecology, save our biospheres, and keep the world safe for mankind.
This video will show strong evidence that the persons running the Unsaid Earth Summit are actually setting a net to place the power over the Earth and its peoples into their hands. Brave, bold deeds by the citizenry are needed quickly. Once a government signs their treaties, their citizens are de jure in the hands of the world order. There's that motto again, in our hands. Whose hands? The same world order families that planned World War I and World War II, that tricked the third world countries to borrow funds and rack up enormous debts. The same world order that stole much of the money borrowed by Africans and other nations and hid it in Geneva banks. They are the persons who financed Hitler, manufactured the Holocaust, and managed to blame the terrible deeds on the German people. They can be credited with manipulating famines in Ethiopia and elsewhere and purposely creating war and debt to bring societies into their control. The world order crowd are not a nice group of people. Here are some phrases from the document of the Secretariat for World Order, which were distributed at the Des Moines Unsaid meeting. We are the living sponsors of the great Cecil Rhodes' will of 1877, in which Rhodes devoted his fortune to the extension of British rule throughout the world and colonization by British subjects of the entire continent of Africa, the Holy Land, the valley of the Euphrates, the islands of Cyprus and Candia, the whole of South America, the islands of the Pacific not heretofore possessed by Great Britain, the whole of the Malay archipelago, the seaboard of China and Japan, the ultimate recovery of the United States of America as an integral part of the British Empire. We stand with Lord Milner's credo. We too are British race patriots, and our patriotism is the speech, the traditions, the principles, the aspirations of the British race. Do you fear to take the stand at the very last moment when this purpose can be realized? Do you not see that failure now is to be pulled down by the billions of Lilliputians of lesser race who care little or nothing for the Anglo-Saxon system. At the Fourth World Congress meeting in 1987, some other bad remarks about common people were made. I'm going to play them for you now. For instance, here is David Lang, a Montreal international investment banker, one of their pack, decreeing that these environment and economic activities of the world order not be shared with the public. He calls us cannon fodder. Listen to this.
I suggest, therefore, that this be sold not through a democratic process. That would take too long and devour far too much of the funds to educate the cannon fodder, unfortunately, which populates the earth. We have to take almost an elitist program that we can see beyond our swollen bellies and look to the future in time frames and in results which are not easily understood or which can be, with intellectual honesty, be reduced down to some kind of simplistic definition.
Does it make you feel uncomfortable that the arrogant rich are close to complete rule over the United States, Canada, and other countries? Here's more. The decrees leading to the Earth Summit were dictated without debate or opportunity for dissent. The treaties the World Order once signed and unsaid will supersede national laws.
What I hear you saying is it's a big cover for a plan to save the wealth of the wealthy. Is that what's going on here? Is it that the powerful people in the world, beyond any philanthropic feelings or motives they might have, is it that the powerful, wealthy people of the world have designed a plan that will save their wealth and power? Is that what I hear you saying?
Yes, the World Conservation Bank is going to be the decoupling mechanism for the wealthy to disengage themselves from capitalism and go to the back of the bank, so to speak, and become the creditors of the bank and then wind up as the world's dictators.
What I'd really like to talk about now is how it all got started with the Bolsheviks in 1917. It's very important for us to understand, first of all, that capitalists and communists are not enemies. They have never been enemies. And in my opinion, they're in a conspiracy together, which I've called the International Capitalist Communist Conspiracy. And to that conspiracy theory of mine, you have provided tremendous data and documentation over the years. And you have brought that to the American people. You've told me in other interviews that no one on the left or the right has ever argued with the facts.
Oh yes, that's true. And of course I didn't know you when I was writing the books. I accidentally proved you right, without knowing you or that you made the thesis.
Yes, definitely. I'm not implying you wrote the books deliberately for me.
And of course, this left-right, this left-right thing is nonsense. Left-right is just these are like horse blinkers. You know, you put blinkers on a horse to make it look down the road. That's what left and right means, is to control people's thinking. Some you put in the left packet, some you put in the right packet. But the truth, as you just mentioned, the truth is that the capitalists and the communists are hand in hand, they're allies, they're united. From before 1917, capitalism has built up the communism for one reason or another, which we might want to get into. It is a conspiracy. I think you accepted that before I did. I denied the conspiracy for years until the weight of evidence just made me accept it. Academics are a little slow on these things.
We need people
I will agree.
Like you. We need people like
what you said
to do
today, I will accept a capitalist, communist, international conspiracy. There is no question about it.
Well, my sense of it is that I could never understand the East-West configuration and why our government, year upon year, would make so many decisions contrary to freedom, contrary to the best interests of our people and even of our allies. And I experienced this in a profound period of pain when I was studying in Switzerland in 1956 during the Hungarian uprising. It left an indelible mark upon me to see those refugees coming into Switzerland and the Swiss students holding vigils in the streets on behalf of the Hungarians, and to think that our nation would allow the Hungarian people to be crushed. Yes. It changed my life, that experience.
We allowed them to be crushed, and the Soviets, you will remember, behaved in a typical Soviet way. They promised that they would not intervene, and then they intervened.
It was a very complex deception that they
Deception
practice.
total. You've got the same thing in Afghanistan today, where they,
Yes.
with our State Department going along with it, where the Soviets are putting out the feelers they want to withdraw, and our State Department is saying, well, this is acceptable. Deception. Glasnost is another deception, if we can come up to date.
Once we can agree upon a capitalist communist conspiracy, then we have to study the nature of the power elite and the super rich and the people who have the feeling that they control the planet and that we belong to them and we are used by them to their ends.
Former Secretary of State Alexander Haig and CIA Director William Casey are two of these master conspirators who are plotting to establish world government. Now, what do you say? You know, that kind of silly, asinine statement is what makes people laugh. That's the John Birch Society.
Well, Tom, I'm sure being a long-standing member of the Rockefeller apparatus and as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations of long-standing, you're fully aware that there is an elitist core in this country that has seen value in subsidizing communism, of protecting communism.
It has?
Sure. There is an elite core in this country that has dominated American society.
Well, I'm not one of them.
Well,
Trilateral Commission.
Trilateral Commission, Council
Relations.
on Foreign Relations. Well, let's face it, they've dominated the State Department for 40 years, and pretty much openly
All right,
so.
but what are they trying to do?
Well, their objective is to try to bring about a gradual transition in our society, a dissolving of sovereignty, and a moving steadily to the left on the political spectrum.
Well, who
It's
are
the
they?
belief, the elitist groups that I mentioned, particularly key individuals and policymakers in the
Is
Council
the
on Foreign
International
Relations.
Monetary Fund part of this?
Well, I would say the International Monetary Fund has certainly been set up for the purpose of facilitating that transfer of sovereignty and transfer of wealth. You are looking at a group that has worked to bring about a dissolution of national sovereignties on the road to world government. And certainly you're familiar with local professor Carroll Quigley, who has been part of your club, in which he admitted all this. And he said in his book, Tragedy and Hope, the only thing I disagree is that we've worked to keep it a secret. And you see Arthur Schlesinger Jr. writing way back in 1947, says, yes, this is the hidden policy of America. But we can't tell the American public because they're too unsophisticated to see the value.
What is the instrumentality of world government? What is the
All the
instrumentality through
things
which...
to say about Arthur. That's the silliest statement I ever heard. He never made anything like that.
Well, let me suggest that you read the May-June issue of the Partisan Review of 1947, Tom, and you can read it for yourself. It's called
Arthur
the Schlesinger
Schlesinger said there was
Manifesto.
a conspiracy
Oh,
to
he didn't
promote
use the word.
communism.
Oh, no, he didn't use the word conspiracy. He said that the objective, the secret policy, which we can't tell the American public because they're not sophisticated enough to see the value, is that through a steady result of erosion of New Deals, we bring the American society steadily to the left,
All right.
and through a sound concept of benign containment, we merge into the vital center of the socialist left. Those are his words, not mine.
When you use people like Casey, who's on the Council on Foreign Relations, David Rockefeller's Trilateral Commission, what do you mean, or do you mean, is that your term, the term conspiracy?
Well, there are many different levels of the problem. But yes, the term has been used, the term of conspiracy. When you have a group of people...
I mean, they're
working
actively collaborating, and at the other end of that point of collaboration are communists, and on this end of the point of collaboration is Bill Casey and trilateralists and CFR
Al
guys.
Haig.
You have people who are part of the elitist structure of this country that have dominated this country openly for 40 years.
I know, but they're not... Is that a conspiracy?
Now, wait a minute. If people quietly working together for evil objectives, two or more, that by definition is a conspiracy.
Okay, welcome to the final part of Chapter 1 of this book. Chapter 1, Part 3, If Fabian Socialism is a Major Part of the Invisible Government Influencing Politics, what are the entities influencing the capitalist arm of the fascist plutocracy ruling the world? And yes, I did change that title a little bit from the original that I had because I didn't like corporate. Capitalist made more sense because of what we're going to be covering today. I sincerely hope that you're enjoying what I've laid out so far and are learning a lot about why the world is the way it is today and who's behind the insane type of reality that we live in right now. And what I'm going to do today is show you the rest of the pieces of the puzzle. Because we've heard all about the Fabian Socialists, a little bit about the Club of Rome, and now we're going to show you the rest. And we're going to start with the top of the pyramid, essentially. The superclass, the hierarchy from which all of the beliefs down here on the bottom, we the people, our reality that we live in, it's all created up here at the top of this pyramid. And we're going to be primarily focusing in part 3 of this chapter on things like the United Nations, the Club of Rome, World Economic Forum, Council on Foreign Relations, Chatham House, and the Trilateral Commission. But where we're going to start here is all the way at the very top with the Committee of 300. And the one man out there who's probably the foremost expert on this topic in the world is John Coleman. And he wrote a book back in 1991 titled The Conspirators' Hierarchy, the story of the Committee of 300. And I put 3 different covers from different editions on the slideshow here just to show you what this book is all about. We see the world here. The first one's in a cage, the second one's in a lock and chains, and the third one has the shadow government, the faceless people behind the scenes, the invisible government, right? Men we've never heard of, all deciding at a table here plans to control the world. And these are the strings right here. So he spent 10 years doing the research on this before he wrote the book. And what you're going to find out here is that everything's connected, all at the very top of the pyramid. So let's start with the foreword to the book. All right, I'm just going to read it here. In my career as a professional intelligence officer, I had many occasions to access highly classified documents. But during service as a political science officer in the field in Angola, West Africa, I had the opportunity to view a series of top secret classified documents which were unusually explicit. What I saw filled me with anger and resentment and launched me on a course from which I have not deviated, namely to uncover what power it is that controls and manages the British and United States governments. And that's the same thing I look at from my life, going all the way back to April 21st of 2007. What I learned that night filled me with anger and resentment and launched me on a course from which I haven't deviated for the last 19 years. So I guess when people of conscience come across information that's contrary to what they've always believed, they actually care enough to learn more. Okay, and I'm one of those people. John Coleman was one of those people, and there's many people out there trying to warn the world. Sadly, as you'll see, not enough people truly care. And that's why I'm writing this book the way I'm doing it, because if people who do care get through the whole book, they will realize the power in the remedy. And those people will share this information with as many people as they can. And that's how we're going to build the critical mass we'll need to break free, walk away from the system. And once we do that, it will dissolve. Because once we remove our energy from the system that's literally surviving on it, the system will become obsolete and die. And that's ultimately the goal. That's the solution. I was thoroughly familiar with all of the well-known secret societies, such as the Royal Institute of International Affairs, RIIA, the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, the Bilderbergers, Trilaterals, and all the spin-offs of these secret societies. As an influence officer, and even before that as a young student in the course of my studies at the British Museum in London, I had cut my teeth on all of them, plus a good number of others with whom I imagine Americans were familiar. But when I came to the United States in 1969, I found that names like the Club of Rome, the Round Table, the Fabianists, the Venetian Black Nobility, the Mount Pelerin Society, Hellfire Clubs, and many others were at best totally unknown here, or else their true functions were at best but poorly understood, if at all. In 1969 to 70, set about remedying the situation in a series of monographs and cassette tapes. And because of this, he was attacked. So he goes on to write, Their program of calumny, lies, and hatred, disinformation about my work, even lately attributing it to other writers, continues unabated, but it has not had the desired effect. I shall carry on with my task until I have finally ripped the mask off the entire secret upper-level parallel government that runs Britain and the U.S. This book is part of that ongoing effort. Well, let's talk about the Club of Rome, okay, because that's one of the groups in that hierarchy, in the superclass that they like to call themselves. Now, certainly a fair number of us are aware that the people running our government are not the people who are really in control of political and economic matters, domestic and foreign. Okay, and we've already established that fact in Chapter 1 here. This has led many to seek the truth in the alternative press. Those newsletter writers who, like me, have sought but not always found what it is that is making the United States terminally ill. And he was writing this back in 1991. So he already saw the problems through over 3 decades ago. What we did find was that the people, okay, the average Joe on the street, right, walk in great darkness, mostly not caring or bothering to find out where their country is headed, firm in the belief that it will always be there for them. And again, this was, 35 years ago. What you saw from the opening of this book, that first video montage to open up the introduction, a lot of people are aware now, okay, that the system is not always going to be there for them. And so that's why I'm coming out with this book now, because I believe that there's enough people out there that will be interested in this information to turn the tide, because they are now looking for solutions. They know that the system is broken, and they're expressing it in these videos all over TikTok and YouTube and wherever social media they can tell their story and share it with the world, because they know that things are not right. This is the way the largest population group has been manipulated to react. That's exactly what Edward Bernays was talking about on that first page of propaganda. All right? Manipulating the mind of the masses. And their attitude plays right into the hands of the secret government. That's exactly what Bernays said. We're going to manipulate your minds to build a democratic society that basically empowers and keeps the invisible government controlling everything. So, and again, as I highlighted the problems in the introduction, the system itself, and the belief of the majority that the system is legitimate, that's what needs to change. And that's why I'm covering everything that I'm covering in this book. All the details need to be understood by people before they can realize that, wow, we have a real problem here. All right? I know a lot of people already realize that there's a problem, a really bad problem, but they don't know where to start. So again, this book is not only the launching pad, but the solution as well. And chapter 7 and 8 are all about the solutions. Now, we frequently hear about they doing this, that, or the other, and we already talked about they, the hierarchy enslaving you. They literally seem to be able to get away with murder, which they do all the time. They increase taxes, send our sons and daughters to die in wars that do not benefit our country. They seem above our reach, out of sight, frustratingly nebulous when it comes to taking action against them. And again, them in quotes. The hierarchy exploiting mankind. No one seems able to clearly identify who they are. It is a situation that has pertained for decades. During the course of this book, we shall identify the mysterious they, and then after that, it is up to the people to remedy their situation. Now, while John Coleman does a great job in this book of identifying who they are and how the system works, what he doesn't do in the conspirators' hierarchy is offer a solution to remedy the situation. And that's where this book is different, because I am showing you who they are in a much more concise fashion in just 3 parts of chapter 1. He dedicates an entire book to the Committee of 300 and all the groups that they control. But I'm going to give you in chapter 8 a full, turnkey, step-by-step, logical solution to extricating humanity from the grips of they and them. the Committee of 300, and the hierarchy enslaving us. Okay? On 30th April 1981, I wrote a monograph disclosing the existence of the Club of Rome, identifying it as a Committee of 300 subversive body. So let's look a little bit deeper into them, because we already brought them up in part 2 of chapter 1 as far as working with the Fabian Socialists. This was the first mention of both of these organizations in the United States. I warned readers not to be fooled by the feeling that the article was far-fetched, and I drew a parallel between my article and the warning issued by the Bavarian government when the secret plans for the Illuminati fell into its hands. We shall return to the Club of Rome and the role of the Committee of 300 in U.S. affairs later herein. Now, he made many predictions in that article from 1981, and he highlighted some here. He said, many of them have come to pass, such as the unknown Felipe Gonzalez becoming Prime Minister of Spain, and Francois Mitterrand being returned to power in France, the downfall of Giscard d'Estaing and Helmut Schmidt, the return to power of Swedish nobleman and Committee 300 member Olof Palme, the nullifying of Reagan's presidency, and the destruction of our steel, auto, and housing industries in terms of the post-industrial zero-growth order handed down by the Committee of 300. So everything that was happening in the 80s, he had predicted based on his research from 1969 to 1981 of this group, because he understood how they worked, and he knew that they were going to purposely create the Rust Belt, which we now know as the Rust Belt in the Midwest, destroy our steel and auto industries, which obviously has happened because of the post-industrial zero-growth order handed down to them by the Committee of 300. Okay, so he saw what was happening, and he predicted it all. The importance of Palme lies in the use made of him by the Club of Rome to deliver technology to the Soviet Union on the forbidden list of U.S. customs, and Palme's worldwide communications network employed to train the spotlight on the phony Iran hostage crisis, while he shuttled back and forth between Washington and Tehran in an effort to undermine the sovereign integrity of the U.S. and place the phony crisis in the realm of a Committee of 300 institution, viz. The World Court at The Hague in Holland. So that whole thing that created what we're now dealing with today, the Islamic theocracy in Iran, was manipulated from behind the scenes by the Committee of 300 and the Club of Rome. So the reality that we're living in today was created by these people. Every last bit of it. All the major things that you see on the world stage have been orchestrated from behind the scenes. And that's what he's laying out in this book. In what is, in fact, an open conspiracy against God and man, which includes enslaving the majority of humans left on this earth after wars, plagues, and mass murder have done with them, is not well hidden. In the intelligence community, it is taught that the best way to hide something is to place it in open view. And that's exactly what Revelation of the Bethid that we talked about in part 1 of chapter 1 is all about. They put everything in plain view. And if you can't pick up on it, if you can't figure it out, it's your fault. Karma shifts to you. We're telling you what we're doing. We're showing you before we do it. And we're predictively programming the world we want you to build for us, and you're doing it. So all the pain you're feeling right now is essentially your fault. This is the attitude of these people. This is the ideology of the elitists running the world. And I don't call them elite. I don't know if I explained this, but elite comes from Elohim, which is the gods. So El meaning God and Ite meaning like. Godlike. They refer to themselves as elite, but I refer to them as elitist or the criminal class because they're not godlike. They're the opposite of godlike. They're demons. They're hateful. They're control freaks. They're sociopaths. They're psychopaths. That's who runs the world. Now, the upper level parallel secret government does not operate from dank basements and secret underground chambers. It places itself in full view in the White House, Congress, and number 10 Downing Street, and the Houses of Parliament. It is akin to those weird and supposedly terrifying monster films where the monster appears with distorted features. long hair and even longer teeth, growling and slavering all over the place. This is distraction. The real monsters wear business suits and drive to work on Capitol Hill in limousines. And they drive to work to Wall Street in limousines as well, right? These men are in open view. These men are the servants of the one world government, new world order. And then he goes on to say, like the rapist who stops to offer his victim a friendly ride, he does not look like the monster he is. If he did, his intended victim would run off screaming in fright. The same applies to government at all levels. All right, that's what I'm laying out in this book. Government is not your friend. It never has been. It never will be. But you keep voting for it. And therein lies the problem. And I'm going to show you how we peacefully dissolve it and create a new system, a new social order that will allow the American dream to flourish once again. President Bush does not look like a dutiful servant of the upper level parallel government. But make no mistake about it, he is as much a monster as are those horrors found in horror movies. And he was talking about President Bush 41, who was president in 1991. And then his son went and did the exact same thing. And then he goes on to say, stop for a moment and consider how President Bush ordered the brutal slaying of 150,000 Iraqi troops. And this was the original, Operation Desert Storm in 91. In a convoy of military vehicles carrying white flags, they were surrendering on their way back to Iraq under Geneva Convention rules of agreed disengagement and withdrawal. So you're not allowed to engage them. What did he do? He firebombed them. Imagine the horror of the Iraqi troops when, in spite of waving their white flags, they were mowed down by American aircraft. And another part of the front, 12,000 Iraqi soldiers were buried alive in trenches they occupied. This is the United States. This is who these people are. We are the evil empire, whether you want to agree with that or not. And if you don't agree with that, it's because you're plugged into that hive mind network that tells you otherwise. And it's time to perhaps look at the evidence that will change that perception of reality. All right? Because the world doesn't look at us as the shining beacon on the hill anymore. Most of the world views the United States as the evil empire. And I'm setting about to change that and show the world who we, the American people, truly are. Is that not monstrous in the truest sense of the word? From where did President Bush get his orders to act in this monstrous fashion? He got them from the Royal Institute of International Affairs, who received its mandate from the Committee of 300, also known as the Olympians. So again, the presidents aren't making the decision. And when President Trump decided to go in and attack Iran, it wasn't his decision. He was doing it on orders. Because Trump, like every other president of the United States since, at a very minimum, 1913, has been a puppet of this hierarchy that hijacked our government completely by 1913 with the implementation of the Federal Reserve. Who are the conspirators who serve the mighty all-power Committee of 300? The better informed of our citizens are aware that there is a conspiracy and that the conspiracy goes under various names, such as the Illuminati, Freemasonry, the Round Table, the Milner Group. To them, the CFR and the Trilaterals represent most of what they do not like in regard to domestic and foreign policy. Some even know that the Round Table has a big input into the United States affairs through the British ambassador in Washington. The problem is that real hard information on the treasonous activities of members of the invisible government is very hard to come by. Because, of course, they control the media as well. So, and we're going to talk about that at the end of this chapter here. Some may already have heard my expose on the foreign aid scandal, in which work I named several conspiratorial organizations, whose number is legion. Their final objective was the overthrow of the U.S. Constitution and the merging of this country with a godless one world, new world order government, which will return the world to conditions far worse than existed in the Dark Ages. So we're entering into a neo-feudalistic world. And again, why I'm doing all this work? Because I don't want to end up there. And if I can show enough people that this is our reality, and they share this information with enough people, and we can get to a critical mass, we can stop it in its tracks. Because as you'll see in chapter 8, we have always had the power. And that's why they use propaganda, to keep us from questioning our reality. Okay? And they propagandize the masses to believe that those of us trying to show you the true reality, the true nature of our cage, are just crazy conspiracy theorists, right? But you've now seen 3 parts of this video book. Do I come across as a crazy conspiracy theorist hiding out in his mom's basement? Or do I sound like a rational human being who truly cares about humanity? You know, who are you going to believe? The people who have been lying to you your entire life, or someone who truly cares about our future? The slow but sure disintegration of industrial nation states, the destruction of hundreds of millions of people referred to by the Committee of 300 as surplus population, and the removal of any leader who dared to stand in the way of the committee's global planning to reach the foregoing objectives. Let us talk about actual case histories, the attempt to communize and deindustrialize Italy. The Committee of 300 long ago decreed that there shall be a smaller, much smaller, and better world. That is their idea of what constitutes a better world. The myriads of useless eaters consuming scarce natural resources were to be culled. Industrial progress supports population growth. Therefore, the command to multiply and subdue the earth, found in Genesis, had to be subverted. This called for an attack upon Christianity. The slow but sure disintegration of industrial nation states, the destruction of hundreds of millions of people, referred to by the Committee of 300 as surplus population, and the removal of any leader who dared to stand in the way of the committee's global planning to reach the foregoing objectives. Now let's go back to part 2 here real quick and look at the quotes from Maurice Strong, who was one of the founders of Agenda 21, right? Isn't it the only hope for the planet that the industrial civilizations collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring that about? And he was working with the Club of Rome, along with all the other organizations we're going to talk about in this chapter. Either we reduce the world's population voluntarily, or nature will do this for us, but brutally. But nature won't do it. Because as you'll see later on in this book, if we align with nature, and we live in harmony with nature, we will all live in abundance. It's the system that's destroying our world. But they're gaslighting into believing that it's you. It's we the people. We're the problem, not them. 2 of the committee's earliest targets were Italy and Pakistan. The late Aldo Moro, Prime Minister of Italy, was one leader who opposed zero growth and population reductions planned for his country, thereby incurring the wrath of the Club of Rome. In a Rome courtroom on November 10, 1982, a close friend of Moro's testified that the former Prime Minister was threatened by an agent of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, who was also a Committee of 300 member, while he was still the U.S. Secretary of State, and he's referring to Kissinger. It will be recalled that Prime Minister Moro was kidnapped by the Red Brigades in 1978 and subsequently brutally shot to death. So, if you go against the system, you will be eliminated. It was at the trial of members of the Red Brigades that several of them testified to the fact that they knew of high-level U.S. involvement in the plot to kill Moro. When threatening Moro, Kissinger was obviously not carrying out U.S. foreign policy, but rather acting according to instructions received from the Club of Rome, the foreign policy arm of the Committee of 300. So, now we're beginning to see the power of the Club of Rome. And let's again flash back to part 2 of chapter 1 and look at this slide real quick. Because the Club of Rome is the entity that literally invented the global warming hoax. Okay? It's just invented, and it's become the reality of billions of people around the world who believe it's really happening. And searching for the common enemy against whom we can unite. We, the elitists, right? We came up with the idea that pollution The threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill, right? So we came up with the idea. That's it. It's just an idea they came up with. I mean, water shortages, do you really care about water shortages? Are you stopping these AI data centers that are taking massive amounts of water from the people? No, they don't. They don't care, because the AI data center build out is part of the digital panopticon that we're being merged into in the technocratic future. So again, they don't care about pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, or famine, right? Because they want to depopulate the world anyway. They're just telling you we care about it so that you go along with their plans. That's the Hegelian dialectic. We create the problem, right? The media pushes all of this stuff. How many times do you hear about global warming or climate change? Almost every single day. Anytime there's a big storm, oh, must be climate change. It was all invented by the Club of Rome. These are the people that we're dealing with. They're control freaks. All these dangers are caused by human intervention in natural processes. And it is only through the changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself. So again, they look at you as their enemy. And you need to be either reined in and controlled in a way that they deem in balance with nature, or you need to be culled. That's who we're dealing with. That's the psychopathy of the superclass. But again, they're never going to blame it on their economic model, which is the real cause of all of this, except there is no global warming. That's a hoax. And if you believe there is, you need to check at the hive mind network that you're plugged into that makes you believe that. And if it triggers you, if it triggers your emotions, it's meant to do that. That's what propaganda is for. But again, if you do the research and you look at the data, there is no overall warming. In fact, the world currently is in a carbon dioxide starved state. If we add carbon dioxide, we would get more growth. I mean, that's what they pump into the tomato farms to get the tomatoes to grow. They pump carbon dioxide into them. So the world is actually in a carbon dioxide starved state right now, and they're trying to sequester it, and they're trying to eliminate it, and they're trying to reduce it when we actually need more. So that whole thing is a lie. The world is being polluted. The ecosystems are being destroyed by corporations in the quest for more profit, for their shareholders, for the elitist, for the criminal class, so that they can buy up the world out from underneath their feet and tell us they now rule us. This is now a one world socialist dictatorship, and you did nothing to stop it. So what are you going to do now? We have everything in place. We have the digital panopticon in place so that you can't rise up. So we have to stop it before we get there. Again, that's why I'm doing this book. For free. Okay? Everybody is connected. Everybody in the world can watch this. Will they? I don't know. It's going to be up to you to convince people to do it. Because I've tried. And I don't know what it is. If it's people's ego, if it's their lack of attention span, or, what is it? People don't want to know, or they can't be bothered, or they don't have time. Yeah, you have time. You have time to get through all of this content and to understand how much power we really have. Anything else is an excuse. Because if you can't take time to this, you're just going to waste it on social media, on television shows, on anything that's not moving humanity forward to a better world, when you could be focused on building a solution. Is quite honestly wasted time. Anyway, I got a couple more slides here about the Club of Rome and the impact that they've had on the world. One of Tavistock's chief wreckers of our way of life was Dr. Alexander King, a founder member of NATO, a favorite of the committee, and a leading member of the Club of Rome. King was assigned by the Club of Rome to lower the standard of American education by taking control of the National Teachers Association and working in close conjunction with certain members of the U.S. Congress. By 1993, the National Teachers Association had become a formidable socialist tool in the struggle for possession of the minds of our children. All right, now, I just saw a YouTube video earlier today that most of Gen Alpha does not even know how to read. The majority of Gen Alpha cannot read or comprehend. And that's what Orwell warned about in 1984. And it's all because these people hijacked our education system. And it started in the mid-19th century with the introduction of the Prussian schooling model into the American society. That instead of teaching people how to think, how to use your mind to critically discern fact from fiction, to look at rhetoric and decide if the grammar and logic match the rhetoric, no, they just basically teach you what to believe now. And if you challenge it, you're a problem. Your attention deficit disorder, your attention hyperactivity attention deficit, right? If you don't agree with them, sit down and shut up. That's the American education system. And we wonder why everything is degrading around us, why people don't care. Because we're not educating our children the way they need to be educated. But in the solution that I'm proposing, everybody would be educated correctly from the first time that they ever go into a school. Okay? Because that's all part of the Constitution that I've proposed as a solution to the current social order that we're living in. That's not beneficial to anybody. That's actually destroyed the American dream. Outcome-based education, which Charlotte Iserbyt wrote extensively about in The Dumbing Down of America, was the method whereby the wholesale socializing of American school children was being carried out. And this was all from the Club of Rome. Okay? Orders came down from on high at the very top of the hierarchy to introduce this type of schooling into the American public school system. And here we have another instance of the Club of Rome intervening in national affairs. To show just how all-pervasive the Committee of 300 is, a few words about the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, a Club of Rome creation, and the test it ran against a nuclear power station at 3 Mile Island, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Seems in order. Termed an accident by a hysterical media, this was not an accident, but a deliberately designed plot to reverse favorable public opinion to nuclear power-generated electricity. Again, if they're going to deindustrialize the nation, you have to first attack the power grid, which is what they were beginning to do back then. 3 Mile Island was a crisis test for FEMA. This was a Hegelian dialectic. This was a false flag event. An additional benefit was the fear and hysteria provoked by the news media, okay, that hive mind to create the public outrage, shut down nuclear power, right? It's showing you exactly how this works, which had people fleeing the area when in fact they were never in any danger. Bear in mind that nobody died as a result of the TMI incident, nor were any serious injuries reported. The stage-managed incident, and we're going to talk about stage-managed incidents in Chapter 3, bore all the hallmarks of a similar incident when Orson Welles scared New York and New Jersey half to death with claims that the world was being invaded by alien beings from Mars. Again, that's the power of propaganda. That's the power of the media. These people's minds that don't have the ability to think critically are so easily influenced. And that's why we have the world we live in today. 3 Mile Island was considered a success and gained favor with the anti-nuclear forces, as it provided a rallying point for the so-called environmentalists, in quotes, well financed by Atlantic Richfield, an oil company, and other major oil companies. So there you go. This is how the world works. The wealthy corporations and all these entities non-governmental organizations, secret societies, what have you. They meet, they decide the world that they want to create, then they create these stories, these Hegelian dialectics, these false flag events, these staged events, to create public outrage so that they can implement their policy, which had they done just without the public's consent, the public would have been outraged and they wouldn't be able to get them through. So this is how everything works in the world. Now, we're going to cover the rest of the top of that pyramid. And the easiest way to do that is, this is the best article I've ever seen on this. The Globalists, the power elite behind the rising New World Order. This is an article first published in 2009 by Dr. Dennis L. Cuddy. And to start here, these historical facts are not included in American social studies. But it's not too late to take a look at the roots and rulers behind today's political, economic, cultural, and spiritual transformation. Groomed for their future roles as single-minded, pragmatic, globalist change agents, most of them reign from behind the scenes. According to their strengths and ideological compliance, they are placed where they're needed. And that's exactly what we talked about in part 1 of chapter 1, where the invisible government picks people from their institutions, mainly Ivy League, and places them into positions where they're needed. In banks, the media, U.S. Congress, government bureaucracies, etc. So again, here's more verification of that. Now, we're going to go to the PDF because it's too long and I didn't want to keep cutting these things out. All right, so here we go. We just covered that. Now, as you ponder the quotes below, notice the utter disregard for human suffering. The primary assault is aimed at the minds and values of the masses. So again, they attack the mind, they attack the perception of reality and your values, right? Because they get away with things that they shouldn't be able to get away with. But bloodshed is always an option when it serves the ultimate purpose, establishing a socialist totalitarian New World Order. Many of the men mentioned below saw nothing wrong with killing large numbers of people if that would advance their cause. John Dewey, one of the prominent architects of the U.S. school system that we have today, viewed the brutality of Bolshevism as a social experiment. And H.G. Wells was unconcerned that countless people will hate the New World Order and will die protesting against it, as we saw in part 2 of chapter 1. Elsewhere, Wells wrote that they would have a cause that would make killing worth the while. And Stuart Chase wrote, a better economic order is worth a little bloodshed. But I'm going to show you a better economic order in chapter 8 in which nobody has to die. Okay? So these are the people. They don't care if people die in their quest for total control over you, your life, and the world. Lord Esher, a powerful member of Rhodes Roundtable, sought shedding American blood at the first possible moment. If many lives have to be sacrificed, the influence upon the American people can only be beneficent. So, again, if you get in their way, they're going to mow you down. Bertrand Russell's suggestion that a Black Death should be disseminated throughout the world once every generation to control population growth. Again, these people are Malthusian. The statements demonstrate the power elite's lack of concern for human suffering. Again, they don't care about you. Now, the author of this book taught American history at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. During the Reagan administration, he worked as a senior associate with the U.S. Department of Education. So, this is where he's getting his information from. The information below is a summary of his book, The Globalists, the Power Elite Exposed. Dr. Cuddy contends that many of the men who rule America are Fabian socialists, Rhodes Scholars, and members of Skull and Bones, or the Council on Foreign Relations, which is an outgrowth of Cecil Rhodes' plan to rule the world. Many conservatives believe that American voters' choice of George W. Bush as president marks the return of the founding values of our republic. And this time he's talking about 44. This is written in 2009. But it should be remembered that George W. Bush, like his father, George H.W. Bush, and his grandfather, Prescott Sheldon Bush, is a member of Skull and Bones. All three of them were. It is the purpose of this article to show how Skull and Bones members work in tandem with Rhodes Scholars and Fabian Socialists to form an important part of what is known as the power elite. So again, there's more verification that these people, capitalists and the socialists, are working hand in hand behind the scene. But the Potemkin Village perception of reality that you get is that they're arch enemies. That the left and the right hate each other. That Democrats are the problem or Republicans are the problem. And if we just get our guys in power, then everything will return to normal. And that's simply not the case because, again, the agenda is playing out behind the scenes. What part has Skull and Bones played in our elections? Professor Carroll Quigley was President Clinton's mentor. And in Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time, the professor revealed that William C. Whitney, Skull and Bones, and others in the late 19th century developed a plan to control both major political parties through financial contributions and have the two main parties alternate power so that the public would think it had a choice. Okay, this goes back to 1883, the year before the Fabian Society was created. All right, so that's how long this has been going on. They're playing you. And if you're still voting thinking it's going to make a difference, you're part of the problem. Professor Quigley said that Whitney's plan lasted about 16 years, and after that, the Eastern establishment, power elite, moved the Democrat and Republican presidential candidates toward the political center, assiduously fostering the process behind the scenes, and nearly met in the center with almost identical candidates and platforms, although the process was concealed as much as possible by the revival of meaningless war cries and slogans, and red versus blue, right? My team versus your team. That's how this all works. Elsewhere, Professor Quigley commented, the two parties should be almost identical so that the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy. So that was actually published in Tragedy and Hope. And it was in 1966, I believe, that it was published. Professor Quigley was allowed to examine some of the secret records of the power elite and found that in the late 19th century, Cecil Rhodes had formed a secret society to take the government of the whole world. Okay? Now, again, this is a plan that's been in operation for well over a century and a quarter. But because of United Nations and Agenda 21, which we covered in Part 2 of Chapter 1 here, and now the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, we're moving ever and ever closer to the goals of not only the Fabian Socialists, but now the Rhodes Roundtable groups, which we're going to talk more about here in this part. And here you go. 1883-84, the British Fabian Socialist Society was organized by George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, Sidney Webb, Annie Besant, and others. 1891, John Cecil Rhodes organized a secret society to take control of the world. His mentor at Oxford was John Ruskin. Now, Ruskin, in an apparent contradiction, referred to himself as a Tory and a communist. Well, the Tories in Great Britain are the conservatives, the right wing. But he also referred to himself as a communist, which is the left wing. So, again, this shows that they're working together. However, one must realize that the elite have no qualms about working with both the political left and the political right, because they control it all from behind the scenes. And they're going to put into power who's going to further their agenda, which is exactly why, as we explained in Part 2 of Chapter 1, President Trump is currently in power, because he is getting the right to stand down while they implement Agenda 21 and SDG 2030, with an ultimate goal of synthesizing them into a world socialist government. As far as Rhodes was concerned, his plan would be carried out via Rhodes Scholars and roundtable groups, which grew out of his secret society of the elect. Rhodes' secret society lasted almost 6 decades, by which time enough of his people had penetrated the areas of politics, economics, journalism, and education, so that this conspiracy was replaced by a network of the power elite. So through infiltration, they got into everywhere they needed to implement and move this plan along. We know that the conspiracy lasted well into the 20th century because in 1931, one of its key operatives, historian Arnold Toynbee, wrote, "We are at present working discreetly with all our might to wrest this mysterious force called sovereignty out of the clutches of the local nation states of the world. All the time we are denying with our lips what we are doing with our hands." And what I'm going to show you in chapter 8 is that sovereignty doesn't belong with nation states. Sovereignty ultimately belongs with the individual. And I'm going to show you and prove that in chapter 8. The third group comprising the world power elite would be the Fabian Socialists, who we've covered extensively already, which included H.G. Wells. In his book, New Worlds for Old, Wells explained what he called a plot whereby heads of state would come and go, but bureaucrats trained at the London School of Economics, established by the Fabian Socialists, would remain in government making rules and regulations furthering the goals of the Fabian Society. And we've seen that Keir Starmer is in power in England today. So there's your proof right there. While the Fabians were using education to move the public towards socialism, Rhodes Scholars were obtaining important posts in universities. And Karl Hassler, Rhodes Scholar, was helping to establish socialist Sunday schools for younger people. About the same time, socialist John Dewey, who had been mentored by G. Stanley Hall, who was brought to Johns Hopkins University as its president, Daniel Coit Gilman, Skull and Bones, was instituting progressive education in classrooms across our nation. And like the Rhodes Scholar influence in journalism, economics, and politics, Skull and Bones members also became involved in these areas. In journalism, Richard Eli Danielson would become the publisher of the Atlantic Monthly, Russell Wheeler Davenport would become the editor of Fortune magazine, and Henry Luce would become the founder of Time magazine. And we know all of those to be major propaganda rags that just put the official narrative out there that infiltrate the minds of the masses. And when they believe the official narratives put out by all these journalistic entities, we live in a false reality created by these ideas that were put into their minds. Right? So if you believe a lie, and if enough people believe a lie, that lie becomes your reality. That's why the world is the way it is today. After World War I ended, members of the Cecil Rhodes Roundtable Group, largely under the direction of Rhodes' successor, Lord Alfred Milner, met with the Inquiry, led by Colonel Edward Mandell House. And we're going to talk about House in Chapter 6. Working with the Fabian Socialists, they established the Royal Institute of International Affairs and its American branch, the Council on Foreign Relations. And the Council on Foreign Relations was referred to by Larry McDonald in that opening video montage. The CFR was largely under the control of associates of J.P. Morgan. This is the capitalist arm because the CFR was largely under control of associates of J.P. Morgan. So there you go. Now, this is the capitalist arm of the invisible government because this is where J.P. Morgan is having influence in the CFR because J.P. Morgan, as the central banker of the world, clearly was affiliated with the Bank of London as well. Some of whom were Skull and Bones members, such as Henry P. Davidson and Averell Harriman. Averell Harriman's brother, E. Roland Harriman, was a member of the CFR. He was initiated into Skull and Bones in 1917, along with Prescott Sheldon Bush, George W. Bush's grandfather. So we see how tightly integrated this group is. And again, there's only ultimately 6,000 of them. And the Committee of 300 controls the 6,000 that control everybody else down the hierarchy. So this is how that whole pyramid works. In 1928, H.G. Wells authored The Open Conspiracy, Blueprints for a World Revolution. By then, he had broken with the Fabians, not in terms of their goals, but only in believing that they should be open about their plan to synthesize Western capitalism with Eastern communism. And there you go. They're working together from behind the scenes. It's a false dichotomy that people down here, the masses, the mindless masses, fight about. Capitalism's the problem. No, socialism's the problem. They're working together, okay? And you're fighting about something that, at the end of the day, you're going to lose. Both sides are going to lose because as long as we keep fighting about the false dichotomy, the agenda moves along, And we're going to wake up one day and we're going to be in a dystopian nightmare. And it was all because we were fighting one another instead of the hierarchy that's creating the false reality. That's why I'm writing this book. Now, let's finish this up. This is a long article. What can we do? Edmund Burke lived at the same time of the American Revolution, and many people were convinced that he founded the modern-day conservative movement. And Edmund Burke, some of his quotes are some of the most profound that I've come across in my research. But he wrote, "When bad men combine, the good must associate, else they will fall one by one, in unpitied sacrifice, in a contemptible struggle." Right? So, our enemies are well organized. Clearly, you can see that. They control the whole world through their networks, through their clubs, their groups, their secret societies, their non-governmental organizations, right? Everything filters down from them. We must work together if we hope to counter them. Okay, and I'm going to show you in chapter 8 how we do that. First, we must return to the faith of our fathers, for that is the foundation of our freedom. And the faith of our fathers was, as they highlighted in the Declaration of Independence, the laws of God's nature, natural law. Okay, we're going to cover that in chapter 8. Then we must rekindle a love for liberty in the people and convince them that life without freedom is life without meaning. We have to restore the American dream. That's why I'm writing this book. We must organize our precincts and tell our neighbors about the power elite. Right? You'll be able to share this video book with everybody. Say, you have to find the time to get through this because it tells the whole story in a way you've probably never heard before. But it also offers a real solution. So it's up to you to share this information with everybody. They claim that they want to do good, but some of them have used wars, revolutions, assassinations, deception, and murder to advance their agenda. Can they justify what they have done? That's how they operate. They use force. They don't use logic. They don't use reason. They don't try to educate the people. It's all force. It's all control. It's all manipulation of the media. It's all manipulation of the economic model. That's it. But again, I'm going to show you how we take that all back. So that was it for that article, an excellent article. You can find it, The Power Elite Behind the New World Order. It's easy to find out there on the internet if you want to find it. But let's get back to the slideshow. Now, let's look a little bit deeper into the roundtable. One of the secret society's goals and methods of operation, Quigley writes, the goals which Rhodes and Milner sought and the methods by which they hoped to achieve them were so similar by 1902 that the two are almost indistinguishable. And this is Lord Milner and this is Cecil Rhodes over here. Both sought to unite the world, and above all the English-speaking world, in a federal structure around Britain. Both felt that this goal could best be achieved by a secret band of men united to one another by devotion to the common cause and by personal loyalty to one another. Both felt that this band should pursue its goal by secret political and economic influence behind the scenes, the invisible government that Bernays is talking about, and by the control of journalistic, educational, and propaganda agencies. And that was again from Carroll Quigley's The Anglo-American Establishment, another book he wrote after Tragedy and Hope. So here's the roundtable. We've got the Council on Foreign Relations, the United Nations, the Bilderberg Group, the Club of Rome, Royal Institute of International Affairs, and the Trilateral Commission. Those are the big six right there. And they all communicate with one another. And this is how the world is run. The 6,000 people are all in these groups. And the people you're voting for, they don't do a thing. They're operating on marching orders from the invisible government. Okay, so all you people out there who think Trump has power and that he's breaking from the system, he's not. He's doing exactly what they want him to do. And if you can't see that, again, you need to disconnect from that hive mind that agrees with you. Because it's all just propaganda. It's all indoctrination. It's all lies. And I've shown that in part 2. And I'm going to show that again in chapter 2. Now, we've got this book published in 2012 called The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy: how an international elite is taking over and destroying Europe, America, and the world. And I believe this is an Irish author. I'm not going to dare try to pronounce it. But this is what this book was about. Because again, we've talked about Fabianism. We've just shown you that the Milner Group and the Rose Group were essentially working together. And this is what this author writes about it. The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy was written as a sequel to Carroll Quigley's The Anglo-American Establishment and Rose Martin's Fabian Freeway. As such, it provides a critical study of the Milner Group and the Fabian Society, two closely related organizations set up in the late 1800s by banking and industrial interests for the purpose of subverting the existing order and establishing a socialist world government controlled by themselves. This book shows that an international elite have been the instigators of major events like the Russian Communist Revolution and the two world wars. Again, all wars are bankers' wars. You go out and find that video by Michael Rivero. It's about 45 minutes where he takes you through every single war ever since the Revolutionary War and shows you that they were all funded by the banks. And the cannon fodder, which they refer to us as in part 2 of chapter 1, goes and fights and dies in these wars, but they do so because of the propaganda of making them feel patriotic and that they're in the right. Then he goes on to mention the Council on Foreign Relations and its sister organization, Chatham House, the United Nations, the European Union, and the Mediterranean Union. So again, there's so much information out there about how the world really works, but most people will never pick up this book and read it to understand. You know, I figured it a long time ago. People don't listen to understand anymore. What people do is they hear to respond. They don't want to change their opinion. They just want theirs known. They're regurgitating their hive mind programming into the world, and if you disagree with them, you're their enemy. And that's why we can't unite. It's because of this mentality, this hive mind mentality, this groupthink mentality is destroying humanity. Now, I'm going to show you in chapter 5 how we overcome that. Okay? But yeah, nobody listens or reads to understand. They're just, I have my beliefs, and if you contradict them, I'm going to regurgitate them to you and show you that you're wrong. Even though you're probably wrong too, right? The same interests have also been operating through world leaders from Winston Churchill and Clement Attlee to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and many others. So again, they're all working together. Obama was a puppet. Bush was a puppet. Clinton was a puppet. Reagan was a puppet. All of them. Probably even JFK was. But I honestly believe that JFK had a conscience and cared about people, and which is why he spoke out against the system. I don't think JFK liked it. And I don't believe his son liked it either, which is why they were both eliminated. But that's another story. Let's move on. It is evident that monopolistic, liberal, capitalist financial interests were at the apex of this world revolutionary movement, followed by an extensive network of liberal and socialist organizations. Among these, liberal parties, including Britain's Liberal Party, the Milner Group, the Fabian Society, various Marxist groups, and their Anglo-American associates played key roles. Okay, so your Democratic Party over here is essentially running in the same groups because they're influenced by the same Fabian socialist ideology. While liberal capitalists were providing the financial backing and influence the economy in ways that were conducive to the first liberal and then socialist revolution, the other groups were responsible for the preparatory political and social groundwork through permeation, indoctrination, agitation, and organization. So again, he's showing you in this book how certain groups influenced the capitalist side of things, while other groups were influencing the political and socialist side of things. But again, they were working together behind the scenes all along. World War I and others were just a smokescreen deployed by international financial interests to instigate revolution and impose socialist regimes that would enable them to implement their agendas. So the Soviet Union was created by these entities. And that gentleman you saw in the opening montage, Anthony Sutton, wrote volumes of books on the topic. Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, Wall Street and Hitler. I mean, all these books he wrote showing how all these revolutions, all these governments were financed by the capitalists. Again, to create a false dichotomy so that we the people could be controlled. Right? It's all about control. This is confirmed, among other things, by the International Socialist Congress of Basel in 1912, which even before the start of the war had resolved that socialists should, with all their powers, utilize the economic and political crisis created by the war to arouse the people and thereby hasten the downfall of capitalist rule. So that's how long this has been going on. They created World War I. A year after this, 1912, was when they implemented the Federal Reserve in the United States. As you'll see in Chapter 6, Edward Mandell House was instrumental in bringing us into World War I by convincing Woodrow Wilson to convince the American public through propaganda that we needed to be there. Right? Again, it's all propaganda. It's all mind control. That's why I started this chapter out with propaganda. Laying this foundation for understanding how the world really works and who's behind it is so vitally important to understanding the rest of this book, which obviously is why it's chapter 1. But sadly, most people in the world don't understand this, especially in America. They wouldn't know any. And quite honestly, before I woke up in 2007, 2.5 weeks after my 40th birthday, I didn't know any of this. I knew absolutely none of this. All of this information that I'm sharing with you has come from due diligence over the past 19 years of my life. 60,000 hours of work and research and writing and creating content to share with the world so that we don't end up in this socialist nightmare, this dystopian technocratic society that they're creating with our energy. We're actually building it for them. I'm not. I'm fighting it. But most people out there are building it for a paycheck. Now, the contents of this book are pretty interesting because obviously socialism, the Fabian Conspiracy, the Labor Party, Council on Foreign Relations, Chatham House, Royal Institute of International Affairs, the UN scam, the EU scam. But look at the last 3 chapters of this book: immigration, multiculturalism, and Islamization. Now, I started this whole book because of the Renee Good shooting and the ICE raids. And the pushback I got from that, saying that I was a socialist or a communist for criticizing what Trump was doing. And clearly, as you've seen by now, I'm a massive critique of the socialist world order. But people were attacking me, and that's why I ended up writing this book. But almost 100 pages of this book are dedicated to how the invisible government created the immigration and the multicultural and Islamic problem on purpose to bring in this socialist world government, right? So when you look at Hegelian dialectics, some are shorter than others, some are longer than others. The one that resulted in the shooting of Renee Good has been operating since the mid-90s, right? And especially after 9/11, when they opened the doors to the Islamic world and said, these Islamists, they're not like those radical ones. They're peaceful. We're going to open our doors to them and invite them into our culture and our societies. But we see now how that's turned out. They don't want to integrate. They want to impose their will on you in your society. So, but this was all done on purpose to destroy your culture in whatever nation you're in right now. And it's all across Europe. It's in the United Kingdom. It's here in America. Now, if they want to come and integrate into the United States and our culture and still practice their religion, I don't have a problem with that. But once they start taking over local governments and spreading like a cancer, that's where you have problems. But again, it was all created by this Milner-Fabian conspiracy, by this invisible government. And it's All documented right here. Well, let's look at one page. Who is responsible for the current immigration problem? In 1948, Labour Prime Minister Clement Attlee passed the British Nationality Act, allowing all inhabitants of the British Empire to enter, live, and work in the UK without restriction. At first, this was not a problem, as immigration levels at the time were relatively low. However, this soon changed. As immigration levels began to rise, public opinion forced the introduction of some restrictions. In spite of this, the Labour Party's policy over time has been to allow more and more immigrants into Britain, under various false pretenses like the need of skilled workers, etc. No explanation was given as to why Britain had fewer skilled workers than third world countries. Instead, in 1997 to 2010, as I just said, the Labour government imposed a deliberate and systematic relaxation of immigration controls to open up the UK to mass migration in order to make it more multicultural. So there you go. If you're wondering where all these people came from, it was your government that opened the doors to them. They allowed it to happen. They're not sneaking in, right? All this, of course, exposes the unbelievable opportunism of the architects of mass immigration. In an extraordinary political and ideological U-turn, the same establishment who in the 1800s pleaded for Africa's and South Asia's need of European colonists is now incredibly pleading for Europe's need of colonization by Africans and South Asians. While Europe was said to once depend on one form of colonialism, it is now said to depend on another. While European colonialism is being indicted as a crime, non-European colonialism of Europe is being praised and promoted as a virtue. So I agree that European colonialism and going in and imposing your will on other cultures is a crime against humanity because it's the imposition of will on other cultures. But now they're saying when we bring them here, that's a virtue. So again, you can't have it both ways. And we saw the Fabians' manifesto on imperialism and colonialism as well. They felt that we can go into other people's lands as long as we use our resources for the benefit of the British Empire, right? And now we're going to bring people into our culture who are diluting it and trying to transform it into their culture. That's a virtue, and if you oppose that, you're Islamophobic, you're a racist, you're a right-wing radical. That's what they say, right? So again, this is all propaganda to get us to fight. And in my work, I'm trying to unite everybody. Because once you break free of the propaganda and you realize it's all propaganda, then we can commit to fixing our world and breaking free of these hive mind ideologies that have been programmed into us. And let's finish this up. Now, the immigrants themselves are indulging in the same kind of opportunism. Africans and Indians, once calling for Europeans to quit Africa and India, even throwing bombs at them to press their point, now insist on the right to settle in Europe at will. On their part, the same groups fighting for the human rights of immigrants systematically and deliberately ignore, deny, or suppress the rights of Europe's indigenous population. And we see that's happening all over Europe. These populations are essentially an invasion. And it's a lot worse in Europe than it is over here in the United States. But I see it on social media all the time that women don't feel safe going out in public anymore because these people have different cultural ideals. They believe that men can talk to women in a derogatory manner. So if you're not immigrating to integrate into a new society, you don't belong there, okay? If I were to move to France, say, I would learn to speak the language. If I were to move anywhere, I would learn to integrate into the society. But if you're going into a society and just imposing your will and your culture on them, that's where we have the problems in today's world. But again, it was all done by design to destroy culture, to create this one world government where we're going to control everything. And if you fight it, you'll be labeled as one thing that you're not. But because we label you as that, racist, whatever, you're going to be canceled from society, right? This is how everything's working right now. And it's all being done by this invisible government that Bernays talked about on page 1 of Propaganda in 1928. They're doing everything. It's all being done from behind the scenes. None of it's a coincidence. They're all conspiring to destroy individual, nationalistic, or sovereign cultures so that they can integrate everybody into this socialist one world government. And they are going to collapse the world economy before they do it. That's all part of the plan, and that's coming. But they're getting all the pieces in place before they do that. Just so you know, we're going to talk about all of this moving forward in the book. But getting back to the Rhodes and Milner groups, let's see how they hijack the media to implement their propaganda into the minds of the American public. In 1920, the secret society evolved into the Royal Institutes for International Affairs, and in 1921, the Council on Foreign Relations here in the U.S. Many of the founding members belonged to America's first intelligence agency, the Inquiry. 1915. March 1915, the J.P. Morgan interests, okay, so this is the capitalist arm, in the steel, shipbuilding, and powder interests, and their subsidiary organizations got together 12 men high up in the newspaper world and employed them to select the most influential newspapers in the United States, and sufficient number of them to control generally the policy of the daily press. They found it was only necessary to purchase control of 25 of the greatest newspapers, basically the top 25 metropolitan areas of the country, because that's where the most of the population was. An agreement was reached. The policy of the papers was bought to be paid for by the month. An editor was furnished for each paper to properly supervise and edit information regarding the questions of preparedness, militarism, financial policies, and other things of national and international nature considered vital to the interests of the purchasers, otherwise known as the invisible government. Okay, so this is how they did it. They bought up the top 25 newspapers, they put editors in there, and only approved propaganda was allowed to be published to the largest population of the country. And that's how they sold World War I. That's how they sold everything, and have been doing it up until this day. And this was even entered into the congressional record by Congressman Oscar Callaway in 1917. You can go look this up in the congressional record. Exactly what I just read to you. They employed them to select the most influential newspapers in the United States. These 12 men worked the problem out by selecting 179 newspapers in the top 25 markets, and then began by an elimination process to retain only those necessary for the purpose of controlling the general policy of the daily press throughout the country. So it doesn't matter what town you're living in, you're going to get the same story as everyone else. And this is how you create the hive mind. This is how you create the groupthink mentality. They found it was only necessary to purchase the control of 25 of the greatest newspapers. And one more thing not mentioned in the previous slide, this policy also included the suppression of everything in opposition to the wishes of the interests served. So there goes your freedom of speech right there. And it happened back in 1915. It was entered into the congressional record in 1917. So your government knows that this is happening, that we don't have any free speech in this country, because free speech that opposes the agenda or the interests of the interests served, right, is going to be oppressed, is going to be suppressed, is going to be ridiculed, called a conspiracy theory, censored, you name it. This is how they operate. And this video book will probably be heavily censored and suppressed as well. So you need to download this and share it with people in your community. Save a copy on your own hard drive so that if it does go away, you still have the information. Again, this was the congressional record, February 9th, 1917, volume 54, pages 2947 to 48. So the government knows, right? The government's in on it. The government is a puppet of the invisible government, the hierarchy that we talked about in parts 1 and 2, and your voice doesn't matter. Your votes don't matter. So the only way out of this is unity in creating our own system and breaking free and transitioning to that new system. which we're going to talk about in Chapter 8. And here we have, this is the media to this day. Comcast, News Corp, Sony, National Amusements, which owns Paramount, CBS, Disney, ABC, ESPN, Time Warner, CNN. News Corp is Fox, Comcast is NBC and Peacock. So all the information that people are getting, it all comes from these 6 corporations. It all comes from the Committee of 300. It comes from the Council on Foreign Relations. All these groups working together. They're the ones who feed the stories into Reuters, into API, that then filter through these news corporations that get on your local news programs. And people turn them on, they watch the TV, they allow this information to be programmed into their consciousness, they plug into that hive mind, they regurgitate it out into the world, and when everybody agrees, that becomes your reality. And that's how we have the world we live in today. A world completely out of balance with nature, completely out of balance with natural law. That's why so many people are suffering and struggling, and why I started this book with that opening montage of people saying, what happened? What happened to our world? Everything changed in 2020, right? It's all part of the program. It's all part of the agenda, and we're getting closer and closer to the end game. So we need to stop that. And I know I keep repeating, I sound like a broken record, but I'm going to show you how we do that in Chapter 8. Now, Controlling the Narrative. This is a book published 2024. The Definitive Guide to Psychological Operations, Perception Management, and Information Warfare. So, again, this is how they operate. They control the narrative through their media, through their networks, so that by the time it gets to the public, it's all in unison. And if you go against the official narrative, you're suppressed, you're censored, you're silenced, you're ridiculed, you're ostracized, right? Now, from this book, Psychological Operations, Perception Management, and Information Warfare is an essential resource designed for military professionals, strategists, policymakers, and scholars engaged in the intricate fields of psychological warfare and strategic communications. And don't think for a second they're only using it on foreign enemies. They're using it on everybody. They're using it on you domestically. Right? This book delves into the multifaceted aspects of psychological operations, PSYOPs. So they're actually happening. So when people talk about PSYOPs, they're not a conspiracy theorist. It's actually happening. This is a book you can buy on Amazon. It talks all about how they do it. Perception management. Why does our perception need to be managed at all? Why shouldn't we just be given the truth? Right? Because if you want to do bad things in the world, you have to conspire with others to do bad things. And that's what a conspiracy is. 2 or more people conspiring to commit a crime. Exploring the theories, practices, and tools that shape today's information battle spaces. So all information out there, they consider as a battle space. And you're just a victim of it. If you don't have the critical thinking skills, we're going to talk about in Chapter 5, to refute them, to keep them from getting embedded into your consciousness and creating a false reality in your mind. Structured to provide a deep understanding of the historical evolution, strategic considerations, and modern applications of PSYOP, this book equips readers with the knowledge necessary to effectively execute operations that influence perceptions, decisions, and behaviors on a global stage. Right? So there you go. This is how you do it. It's happening every day in our world. Influencing perception and behaviors and decisions. Exactly what Bernays talked about in 1928. It covers a broad spectrum of topics from basic concepts of propaganda and media manipulation to sophisticated strategies involving cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, and data analytics. And that gets into rule by algorithm, right? What you're being fed is what you've clicked on and shown interest in. So it creates this feedback loop, and it puts people into information ghettos where you're only going to get your bias confirmed by the information that the algorithm and artificial intelligence is giving you. It's not going to give you anything contrary to what you already believe. And that's how they're going to do it. That's how they're going to merge us into this technocratic one world government. and forced us off the land, forced us into these 15-minute cities for our own good because of global warming and everything else. It's all propaganda. It's all lies. And until you wake up to that, you're part of the problem. Now, I was going to end this here, but I found this excellent article that I meant to integrate into part 2 of chapter 1, but that got so long, and this one's getting long as well, but I just want to go through this article real quick just because it really does show the secret society dedicated to the New World Order, the Fabians, by Professor Gloria Moss, published April 27th, 2025. Now, Fabian Society was established in London in 1884 to subvert the existing order and establish a socialist world government. That's been established. These aims were to be achieved through political control, control of education, destruction of the nation state and its culture, an attack on biology, COVID, and the approval of eugenics, all to be achieved using a gradualist approach. So again, all that's been established in chapter 1 already. We're just tying everything together here. Political power and push for a new world order. In 1897, the Fabian executive announced that the Fabian Society would capture and control the British natives for its profit and their own good. Because you don't know how to run your life for your own good. We're going to show you how to do that. By 1913, Beatrice Webb, wife of early founding member Sidney Webb, could observe that the Fabian Society and the Independent Labour Party were well on the way to controlling the policy of Britain's labour and socialist movement. This history is not taught at school, but corroboration comes from the Fabian Society itself, when it writes that hundreds of Labour politicians are members of the Society, including Labour leader Keir Starmer, MP, and more than half of his shadow cabinet, as well as senior figures in devolved and local government. Sir Keir Starmer, former serving member of the Fabian executive, like Rachel Reeves, stated in his acceptance speech during Downing Street on July 4th, 2024, that our country needs a bigger reset. And we know what the big reset is, the Great Reset from the World Economic Forum. It's the exact same goal of the Fabian Socialists, the Rhodes Roundtable groups, and all of these entities that form this invisible government that we've been talking about in this chapter. With this objective in mind, in 1951, the Fabian Society established the Socialist International to coordinate international socialism, and the Socialist International soon announced that the ultimate objectives of the parties of the Socialist International is nothing less than world government. Right? So that was their goal as of 1951. For us, world government is the final objective, and the United Nations the chosen instrument. So the United Nations is all part of this plan, part of the agenda. So that's why the John Birch Society has been opposing the United Nations for 75 years, and why they are called a fringe right-wing crazy conspiracy theorist organization. That's how this works. That's why I've shown you everything that I've shown you in this chapter, because the people who are fighting this are the ones you need to listen to more than anybody else, because we understand where they're taking us. We've done the deep research. We've spent the thousands of hours required to come to an understanding of how this world really works. And we're trying to share it with you so that we can stop it. Because if we don't stop it, we're all going to be living in a world that nobody wants to live in. So not only do the Fabian Society and World Economic Forum share the same backers, but they also share similar objectives. Case in point is the Fabian objective to eliminate private ownership of land, and that's what they're doing now. In the United States, Gen Z, many millennials, and Gen Alpha, as of the current state of affairs, will never be able to afford to own a home. Okay, that's all been part of the design. So what I'm going to show you in chapter 8 is how we fix that, so that everybody, no matter what kind of job you have, will be able to own your own home and own it outright. No property tax, because that's the world that I'm going to show you in chapter 8. Other threats to land ownership come from an environment and energy policy that could see land appropriated for energy generation and rewilding. And we saw that biological diversity map in part 2 of chapter 1. All the red and yellow you're not going to be allowed to live on, with the driver and accelerator behind this being the so-called climate catastrophe. Again, it was created by the Club of Rome. It's all propaganda to get you to believe in this false reality that the climate, without our intervention, our plans to control society and move you into these stack and pack micro tiny homes in the 15-minute cities, you're going to destroy the world. That's not true. That's just the propaganda that they've gotten millions of people to believe. You have to understand this. This is the agenda. Climate change is part of the agenda. It's not real. Okay? You have to get that through your thick skull if you're still on that reservation, because it's not a problem. The problem is corporations destroying our world for profit and leaving the lands where they extract the resources desolate wastelands after they get the resources out, because it would take away from their profits to do so responsibly and in balance with nature. That's the real problem. The real problem is corporatism, is fascism. But that's the model that's actually running the world. It's not a socialist one world government, it's a fascist one world government, but they're putting socialist in front of that to make you think it's for the people. That's how they operate. So all the socialists in the world think this is wonderful, and they're behind the United Nations, and they're behind the global warming scam, and they're behind the 15-minute cities. And that's why they put Trump in, because they had to get the right wing in the United States to stand down while they implement all of this. So again, this all ties together. And chapter 1 is so important because it shows everyone who hasn't been educated to this stuff, this is the true reality of our world. This is the nature of our cage. And this is the world that we're being taken to. And if we don't unite and stop it, as Edmund Burke said, we are not going to like the world that we're living in very soon. And we're talking within 4 years here. They plan to have everything implemented by 2030. SDG 2030 means they're going to get it implemented by 2030. That's why they set that goal. The destruction of culture. The Fabian objective of destroying the native culture has been a constant over the years. Bernard Shaw, a founding member, considered it good statesmanship to blow up every cathedral in the world. In 1960, Home Secretary and former Fabian Society Chairman Roy Jenkins defined integration into Britain as equal opportunity accompanied by cultural diversity. So again, this goes all the way back to the 1960s. A vision that deprioritizes indigenous culture. No surprises then that state-imposed cultural diversity, renamed multiculturalism, became the established policy of Fabian labor governments. And why the Tories apparently fight against it, but really don't do anything to stop it in Great Britain. This policy of state-enforced cultural diversity was closely linked with mass immigration, which we talked about in the Milner-Fabian conspiracy book. In the late 90s, Tony Blair's Fabian labor regime embarked on a program of systematic state-promoted mass immigration with the expressed aim of making British society more multicultural. And the Fabian Blair-Brown governments of 1997 to 2010 introduced a wide range of pro-immigrant policies, which is why you have the problem you have today, including the systematic and deliberate facilitation of mass immigration to transform British society. Indeed, as it has been said, that the real agenda of Fabian labor policy was to change the ethnic and racial makeup of British society. That's what's happening to Britain. It's happening all over Europe, and the slow creep is already beginning in America here. While the destruction of an entire nation's cultural identity is morally reprehensible, the forcible transformation of a population's ethnic and racial composition comes very close to the accepted definition of genocide. Okay, so if they destroy a culture, they're literally destroying a people, right? As reprehensible as it is, it links with the overarching aim to create a new world order with the destruction of the nation state as a prerequisite. So again, it's all part of the plan. And the Fabians, the Rhodes Roundtable groups, all of them, they're all in on it. This is your invisible government that Bernays talked about right there on page 1 of chapter 1 of propaganda in 1928. And why I took so much time in this chapter, broke it down into 3 separate parts to show you who exactly this invisible government is. So that now you know that what Bernays was talking about in 1928 is the true reality of our world. The thoughts, the opinions, and habits of the masses is intelligently manipulated by this invisible government. Okay, so now you know. So that's our world. That's the foundation of the rest of this book. How do we get rid of this invisible government? I'm going to show you, again, through the rest of the book, how we do that. I'm going to show you some consequences of the invisible government in chapters 2 and 3. Chapter 4, we're going to begin to start talking about the solutions. And then chapter 7 and 8, full on. This is the only solution, as it says on the cover of this book. Now, let's talk about transhumanism real quick. The biological engineering of humans is another recurring Fabian theme. Bertrand Russell of Fabian stated in 1952 in his book, The Impact of Science on Society. Now think about this as you think about the last 6 years, okay? Diet, injections, and injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable. And any serious criticisms of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. Even if all are miserable, all will believe themselves happy because the government will tell them that they are so. So when the World Economic Forum tells you by 2030 you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, this is what they're talking about. This is the ideology. They're going to control you through diet, injections, and injunctions. Criticism will be psychologically impossible. And we already see that in Gen Alpha, who barely can read. So all of their actions over the last 100 years, 125 years, are now coming to fruition right on our doorstep, right before our very eyes. We can see the plan coming. It's right on the event horizon. And if we don't stop it, we're going to end up there in this exact world that Bertrand Russell described in 1952. And trust me, we don't want to be there. Now, one final thing to wrap up this chapter. We create our own reality. Empire and the Illusion of International Law from Rafa to Caracas. And this is from January 29th of 2026 here. And I'm going to read to you a quote that's often been attributed to Karl Rove, who is President Bush's 44 political advisor, but he's refuted that he said it, but it was said. Okay? And it just goes to show you how the reality we live in is created. Now, the aide said that guys like me, the reporter, were in what we call the reality-based community, which he defined as people who believe that solutions emerge from our judicious study of discernible reality. So all you reporters out there, you're reporting on the reality that we're creating, right? And you're going to create solutions out of this propaganda, is basically what he's saying. That's not the way the world really works anymore, he continued. We're an empire now. And when we act, we create our own reality. And this is all the purpose of propaganda. And while you're studying that reality that we just created, judiciously as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, which you can study too. And that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do and report on it and tell this reality that we're creating to your audience, to the public, to the masses. This is how it all works. Now, this is a senior Bush administration aide who was referring this to Ron Suskind of the New York Times Magazine in 2004, often attributed to Karl Rove, who denies saying it, and the reporter never identified the real source. So But that's the reality we live in. And the problem with that is it puts we the people into a perpetual reactive mode. While they're creating new realities, we're reacting to the one that they're reporting on still, right? And they're going to create the new Hegelian dialectic, the new false flag, the new propaganda campaign that they're going to impose on the world. The reporters are going to report on it. We're going to react to it. They're going to offer their solution. This is how the world works. Until we, the people, wake up to this reality and say no more. No, I don't want to be a puppet in this show any longer. I want my power back. And that's what I'm going to show you how we do in chapter 8. But anyway, the moral of this story is that we have to break out of reactive mode. We have to become proactive. We have to realize that the world that we've been sold is a lie. All of it. Every last bit of it. And we need to create a new world based in objective truth. Based in objective reality. Based in natural law. That's the only way we're getting out of this. Once you get to the end of this book, everything will come into such clear focus that you will know exactly how much power we have to change this world and to fix everything. And to cast off this parasite that's thrived on humanity for millennia by harvesting our energy and lying to us, making us believe that their false reality is truth. And because we believe their false reality is truth, we all suffer the consequences of it because it's not aligned with truth. It all operates in violation of natural law. And when you violate natural law, people suffer consequences. Unfortunately, it's we the people at the bottom of the pyramid that suffer most of the consequences. And so that all needs to be undone. And that's what this book is about. But you had to understand the true nature of our reality before we can get there. That's why chapter 1 was so long. But there's so much detail in here, it's irrefutable. You can go to all the sources and see for yourself. What I'm telling you is the truth. Okay? This reality we live in is a false reality. And it's going to be up to us to change it. Reality manufactured. International law has only ever existed in theory. Empire decides practice. So again, he's emphasizing the fact that the system decides reality. You can't take them on through the legal system, right? It only exists in theory. The Susskind quote reads like an operating manual. Manufacture reality with devastating sanctions, rigged indictments, drone warfare, military intervention, and false narratives. Dare the world to catch up. And that's what they do. He said, you'll never catch up to us. We're creating new realities. You're going to continue reacting to it till the end of time. And we're going to fully enslave you. Unless we decide to wake up and start being proactive. That's the primary message of this book. We have to become proactive. When courts and reporters do catch up to us, move the goalposts. Keep pushing that Overton window further out so that we can never catch up. Hypocrisy is a weapon, exhausting the masses, fogging the record, buying time. In the United States, people are weary of endless wars, surveillance creep, ICE, and the rising cost of living, and opposed on basic moral grounds to complicity in genocide. The Nobel Peace Prize often functions as lead cover. And that's exactly why Trump lobbied for it so hard, because he just wanted to be seen as a peacemaker. But he failed this year, and then he launched the war in Iran anyway, because he was told by the invisible government he must do so. Kissinger's award sat atop bombing maps. Obama received it before becoming the drone bomber-in-chief. So again, Obama was just another puppet. So all you people out there on the left who think that Obama was some kind of hero, some kind of progressive hero, no, he was just another one of the puppets of the same invisible government, pushing the socialist one-world agenda. And you need to get over your love of him, your worship of him, because he will never be the solution. The brand now routinely lauds neoliberal respectability. And that's it. That's the end of this chapter. It's up to us. We have to reject this false reality. We have to learn the true nature of our reality. And that's what this book is for. That's what chapter 1 was all about. This is our true reality. Okay? If you reject it, that's hive mind programming. If you reject it, you probably haven't gotten this far, for one. But if you've gotten this far, you get it. You understand that, yeah, this is the world. And you're probably chopping on the bit to get to the solutions. And we'll get there. But this takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to put these videos together, to put these slideshows together and tell the story in the way that it needs to be told. But by the first week of May, the whole story will be told. And we can move forward from there. Again, thank you for your time. I appreciate it more than you can imagine. I appreciate your support. If you can do so financially on my Substack. From here, we're going to move to Chapter 2, which is empirical evidence of premeditated use of deadly force and the criminal system defending it. And this is where this whole video book started. With this, what was going to be a 10-minute video showing empirical evidence of use of deadly force in the Renee Good shooting. But I need to show this in this book to show you the power of propaganda in swaying the public into one belief or another. Okay, so that's chapter 2, and you can follow me there right now, and we'll continue on in understanding the whole truth about how the American dream became a nightmare. All right, again, I love you all. Thanks for your time. We'll see you over there. Bye-bye.